Welcome to the Getting Married Multiculturally podcast, Aveena and Alissa. I'm so excited to have you guys on the podcast as my very first same-sex couple who had a multicultural wedding, Indian American. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And can you guys introduce yourself before we get into the wedding story and your relationships? So just share with the listeners a little bit about what's your nationality, where you guys live right now, and then we can get into how you guys met.
Sure. So I'll go first. My name is Aveena Matthew, and I'm actually first generation Indian. So my parents are originally from South India, specifically Kerala, and I was born and raised in Minnesota.
And I'm Alissa Petey, and I'm American. I was born in Cleveland, but grew up outside of Seattle.
Okay.
And we are now just outside of Seattle in Bellevue, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how did you guys met? Like you said that you lived in two different states and cities. How did you guys end up meeting?
Sure. So I actually moved to Seattle about 5 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
I moved out here for a job. And basically, I would say 3 years into being into Seattle, I met Alissa, and we actually met online on Bumble. Shout out to Bumble. Thank you so much for bringing us together. And yeah, you can.
Yep. So we met on Bumble.
Mm-hmm.
And chatted for about a week or so before our first date, and then we met, and it was like
truly love at first sight.
Yeah, it was great. Best first date ever.
Okay, here's another first for my podcast. I never talked with couples who met on through an online dating app, so that's awesome. Can I ask you more about that? Like, is that scary, or is it more common these days for people to meet that way? You know, less creepy people out there. I don't know.
I think it's actually, I read that it's especially common with LGBTQ people to meet online.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't find it scary. I know some people have had like some horror story dates. I never had any terrible dates, but Aveena was the first person that I actually like talked to, ended up going on a date with when I was using Bumble. So it worked out great for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was, for me, it was a little bit scary just because I'm not from Seattle. And so, not to say that I know the Minneapolis or Minnesota dating scene, but I was more comfortable there. And being out here, I was nervous of who I was going to meet and, you know, if we're going to align in terms of, you know, what I believe or what they believe. And so I was definitely worried, but I mean, I can't argue with who I ended up with. She's amazing. So
yeah, definitely feel the chemistry that you guys are just found each other, the perfect match.
Truly.
Feel pretty lucky.
Yeah. So did the conversation towards marriage got pretty quick brought up since you found each other in such a good environment?
I would say our first date was actually pretty unique. I think Alissa would tell you that it was more like an interview, just because I kind of knew what I wanted, and so did Alissa.
Mm-hmm.
I think we both were at that stage in our life where we were ready to commit to somebody. And so we weren't messing around. I would say even before we had our first date and met physically, we were asking some pretty harsh questions, some very deep questions via text before we actually met. But I'm going to let you talk. So
I would disagree. I wasn't
really
looking. The part I would disagree with is just about myself. Like, I wasn't expecting to meet my wife. I was just I come out of a long-term relationship and was like trying to keep my expectations low.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in meeting Aveena that I was like, oh my gosh, like this is an opportunity that I can't take lightly, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so in talking with you that I realized I'm ready for a long-term relationship. And then I don't think that we started talking about marriage until I don't know, maybe 6 months into our relationship.
We were vetting each other
Definitely.
very quickly. Yeah. We were asking some questions like, I think kids were brought up, just like if you ever wanted to have kids, or do you like kids even?
Yeah.
And I think those things definitely came up early on, and trying to lay that groundwork and foundation.
Yeah. I mean, 6 months is still not that long time, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. I definitely agree. We definitely weren't messing around with each other. And we were ready to take the next step if we were on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say I had a similar relationship status, sort of say, with my husband, because he just came out of a serious relationship and he just kind of wanted to just be single for a while, or I don't know, but I was ready to find my husband to get married,
So we can relate.
yeah, but it's interesting that no matter, what your plan is for the future, if you find the right person, you are willing to just kind of go with it, Yeah.
I agree. And our story is very unique in that way. And we can get into it later. But it's very much that when you're willing to kind of like wait and see what happens, and also like wait it out with them because it's something special.
Yep, definitely. Yep. So do you guys have any proposal story to share?
Oh man, yes, we do.
Let's get into that then.
And talk to my dad.
Sure. So it was kind of, I kind of had told Alissa from the beginning I would love to propose to her, and I would just desire to do that. And so we actually met in October of 2018. And in July of 2019, or actually June in 2019, I went down to meet her parents. They actually live about 45 minutes away from us.
Okay.
So we went down there for the weekend, and something that me and her dad share in common is that we love whiskey and we love cigars. And so one summer night, we went out there to share some whiskey and have a cigar, and we were just talking about work and just general things. And I actually, at that moment, like I knew in my heart that she was the one for me. And so I actually asked her dad for his permission to marry Alissa. And he was elated, and I think he actually teared up and gave me this massive hug and said, of course we would love to. And then I had to her mom was actually in the house, and so I took her aside and asked the same question, because I just wanted to make sure that they knew my intentions with their daughter, and that I wasn't messing around either, and I wasn't just someone coming and going in her life, or in their life, I guess. And so yeah, I'm going to defer to Alissa and have her describe the proposal story, because it's very different than the way way it is.
Yeah.
Hers is much sweeter.
So Aveena didn't end up proposing until 7 months after that. And so I knew that it was coming at some point, but she planted a couple of things to make me be totally unsuspecting when it actually happened. So on my side of the story, I had a day off from work, and I am a therapist, and I do some pretty intense work with people, and sometimes on days off I'll just be exhausted and processing all of my emotions, and this was one of those days where I just really wanted to stay home and just be in bed and not deal with anything. And Aveena said that we had a date planned. And so I was going back and forth on whether I wanted to actually go on this date. And I think I actually told you, I was I don't feel like it. Can we just postpone? And she was saying I still really want to go. And
were you guys living together at that time, or? Okay.
No, that's actually a good point to mention, is that Alissa did not want to move in until we were engaged.
Okay.
She has really great morals and standards. And so to be respectful, I was okay, both of in Seattle, I'm sure you have some awareness that housing is very expensive. And so we were both coming at the end of our lease separately. And so at that point would have been a really good time to move in with each other. And that is January of 2019 is when our lease was both going to be up. And so on this date, that was the day that I was going to propose to Alissa. And it was all of the things that you can imagine going wrong for someone who's planning it happened. So this date was actually my third attempt to propose to Alissa. My first two failed. It fell through, and we were getting closer and closer to moving in together. And we had signed a lease to be moving in together, but we still weren't engaged. And it was like now 3 days before we were, or 4 days before we were moving in together. And so Friday we come and we do this date, and we both were living kind of north of Seattle. And I told her that we were going to go to a date in Tacoma, which is south of Seattle. And on a Friday night, traffic was ridiculous. It was torrential downpour. We were like 2 hours late to the proposal site, which is actually a date spot that we went early on in our relationship. And I had my friends who were photographers to like set up their cameras to take pictures for us, and they were drenched. All their whole equipment was drenched with water. And I take Alissa to this like very dark park, and I was telling her that we were going out to eat, and so both of us had not eaten anything all day. It was just massive disaster, and like just very cold and torrential downpour rain. And I truly don't remember what happened up until I took you to the spot. I like blacked out. I don't know if I actually got my speech out. I don't know if I was shaking or if I was crying. I'm the crier, I would say, but and yeah.
When did you kind of know Alissa? When did you like started assuming that, oh, this is gonna be something more serious than just a date?
So part of why I kept, I like wouldn't let myself get excited because Aveena had sat me down a couple of days before, maybe a week before, and she was saying like, so listen, you and I are going to move in together because like the day of our move in, but we're not going to be engaged yet. And I know because I have these plans that are further out, and I know it's so important for you to be engaged before you move in. And so in my head, I was like, that's fine. Like, it's okay if there's a little bit of time where we're not engaged. But it also, because she had this serious conversation with me, I was thinking like there's no chance it's going to happen before we move in. We had already talked about it. So I think I started to suspect like as we were getting closer to the site, because she was very nervous and she was like looking at maps and trying to figure it out. And it was like, we were getting further out of the city and into like a more park area. But then I really knew when we were walking towards the park, and I could see a circle of tea lights that her friends had set up. And that's when I also went into like, I was just shocked. But yeah,
I tried my best to be like, hey, you should dress up a little bit nicer than usual for this date because it's an expensive restaurant. And I like her, obviously her parents knew.
Because of the pictures, right? Is that why you wanted her to?
Yeah. And as soon as I remember this part very vividly is like, as soon as I proposed to her and she said yes, I said, hey, babe, I have some bad news. We actually aren't going to dinner. There's no dinner planned. So we're going to have to find food very soon because at this point it's like 8 p.m. and we had not eaten anything all day because I said that we were going to have this massive, like, elaborate dinner that actually never happened. And so I was worried about that because I was getting hangry, and I could see that we were both getting hangry a little bit, and we were drinking champagne. So as you can guess, the booziness kind of hit us as well.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
But it worked out, and she said yes. So.
One of the most important parts of the story is that I love reading. And I love going to bookstores, like one of my favorite dates. And so as part of the proposal, you had created a book for me that was like a picture book that you read, and it was going over all the reasons why you love me. And then it ended with, will you marry me?
Oh, wow.
Like such a like nice way to incorporate something that mattered so much to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like the love languages. Do you guys know the love languages? Yeah, and to just expressing your love, what's her love language, you know? I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I love that story. Even with all the bad and yeah. It's so funny, like after when something is done, then you just remember the good things, and the bads are just funny, you know, to share with
Right.
others. Yeah.
And growing up in Seattle, for the most part, I thought it was so romantic that she proposed in the rain, and so did all of my friends from Seattle. Whereas you, Aveena, were like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it was raining!" Like that was
It was like the type
that
of rain.
ruined it.
It was like the type of rain that Seattle doesn't see often, which is like the torrential, hard rain. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But the pictures were beautiful, just because you could see the rain droplets. And it was just like our friends did a really good job. But for me, I was like, oh my gosh, rain is the worst.
But you're absolutely right. Once it's done, it's like it's perfect. It's your story.
And it's good that you went with it, you know, you weren't thinking like, okay, I won't propose again because, you know, the weather, so I'll just do it some other time.
Exactly.
So what happened after that how did you guys started planning the wedding? What was like kind of the first step, or, you know, what were your thoughts after you got engaged?
Sure. Go ahead.
So we happened to be like 15 minutes away from my parents' house the evening that we got engaged. So we decided to go over there, finally get something to eat, and celebrate with like more champagne. And my parents were super excited, of course. And I would say we started wedding planning that night.
Yeah.
I was over the moon about being able to plan a wedding. And so we were, I think that night, starting to talk about like seasons, potential dates that would work, venues, what kind of wedding we wanted. And so like really quickly a spreadsheet was put together of like guests we wanted to have. And then your sister was also involved.
Yeah. Yep. So my sister actually owns an event planning company along with her friends. So they co-own it together, and they're in Minnesota. And so from the jump, like my like desire is always to have my sister in my wedding, and she is by far, next to Alissa, one of my best friends. And she's older to me. So when I told her that she had said yes and all that stuff, I was like, you guys have to plan our wedding. And so their company, Bride Events, actually was the one who put the wedding all together from Minnesota. So it was amazing. Like I give them a lot of credit because first of all, there's a time difference between Minnesota and Seattle, and then even a work like scheduling difference. And then both my sister and her business partner, Milena, they all have kids. And so they're working moms, and then trying to do this wedding. They've never been to Seattle, so they don't know the vendors. And so they did an absolutely tremendous job with just putting everything together. So truthfully, like, and we can talk a little bit later, but like the actual wedding planning process was not as stressful as it could be if you have wedding planners. But they took care of a lot of the little details, as well as just like making decisions for us, and just doing a really good job of being coordinated. So.
Yeah, that's tough. That's really brave of her to take that on that job. But I'm assuming the easy part for her was that she probably knew you and both of you, your relationship. So it was probably like, I know what they like, you know, just it's different than planning a wedding for a stranger, and you just have to ask a bunch of questions like, what would you like? What food do you like? So I'm assuming that made it a little bit easier for her, but still, wow.
Well, and for us, like so many times I would just say, like, I trust your opinion to her sister and her, and Milena, her partner in the business. Like, I just please make a decision. I trust you to decide what's going to look best. So that helped too, like trusting their taste as well.
Yeah, definitely. So how did you guys decide what part of the planning is going to be your task or the other one's task? You know, what maybe like what's your interest in, regardless of the wedding planning?
It's a good question.
It wasn't really anything specific, kind of a little bit of everything for both of you.
I think so. I think like we both came into it like knowing that like obviously I'm not going to like have any input on what Alissa chooses to wear for the wedding, right? And like vice versa. Like we all had our own ideas of what we wanted to wear. So as an example, like I've always envisioned myself wearing traditional Indian for my wedding, irrespective of who I marry. I definitely wanted to incorporate that piece, as well as I definitely wanted to have a henna party. So like those were my two non-negotiables. And you know, Alissa obviously was like, yeah, you do what you want to do, and vice versa. Like I had, to take a step back, we did not see what our outfits looked like prior. And so like I obviously was like, you choose what you want for obviously your wedding dress or what you want to wear. And even for your bridesmaids, you know, you choose what you want them to wear, whether it's incorporating Indian or wearing traditional American, like that's up to you. It's what you envision your girls to wear. And so like that piece of it, there was like some clear kind of boundaries is not the right word, but like some, like we stayed in our lanes. So, for that stuff. And it was great to be able to share like the outfit that I ended up landing on. I was able to share that with her mom and like her side of the family. It was really cool to be able to be like, look what I'm wearing, you know, the morning of or the day of. And so, and vice versa. I think you also had that with my sister and my bridesmaids. You were able to show them what you were going to wear. So stuff like that, we did a pretty good job of staying in our lane, quote unquote.
Great. And then the bride events helped us in terms of like, they were so organized, so many more spreadsheets, and would say like, you guys need to take care of X, Y, and Z. You guys need to order these things for the wedding. We'll take care of calling these people. So there was some direction that was really helpful for both of us.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Just a little bit, if both of you are a little bit off the planning, then they kind of know behind the scenes of both of your you know your side of the, how do you imagine the wedding. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and they were really good at that.
And I see that you, Alissa, your family was more involved into the whole proposal, relationship, wedding planning. What about you, Aveena? What about your family?
So this is where the story is kind of interesting. So I was raised in a very conservative Christian home growing up. And so when I actually proposed to Alissa, we celebrated that weekend. So that Friday I proposed to you, Saturday, Sunday we celebrated. And then on Monday, I actually came out to my family for the first time.
Wow. Wow.
And it was difficult and very, very, very hard. It was kind of what I expected. My family did not agree with it. And they, fast forward, they did not come to the wedding because of that. And so they were not part of the wedding, even though we tried to get them involved. I obviously invited them to the wedding. They had the chance to meet Alissa, which I'm grateful that they actually allowed that environment. So we flew to Minnesota and they met Alissa for the first time. And it actually caused a lot of strain, I think, during the wedding planning, just because I'm the last one in my family to get married. And so this was like the big wedding that they were all waiting for. And they, because I married Alissa, or because Alissa is a woman, they said that they don't agree with it. It was a season of really weird emotions. So we were very happy and there was so much to look forward to, but then it was very dark and sad and lonely at times, just because my family is very vocal. And so they made it known multiple times how they felt about our relationship, and how what I'm doing is wrong and what we're doing is wrong. And so unfortunately, they did not come to the wedding. And so the only family member, like blood family member that was there, was my sister and her family. So she's married, and then she has 3 little girls, and they were at the wedding. So although it was actually really sad, and we're even still dealing with some of that fallout now. I don't think my family necessarily recognizes us as a couple still, even after our marriage. It was difficult, definitely for me, and for that I give a lot of credit to Alissa because kind of alluding to what we said earlier of like, in your own, when you know it's something special, you kind of are patient with them, and Alissa was very patient with me, knowing that I had not come out to my friends or family. And she just had to trust that I was going to do it. And so I'm totally grateful for her, as well as, again, to my sister, just because even with her deciding to come to the wedding and being a part of it, it has caused strain for her and her family with the rest of my family, just because they're the only ones who kind of stood up for us, and being like, hey, like at the end of the day, they're happy and we love them. And so for that reason, we're going to show up for them. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. Yeah.
Wow. I have so many questions, and I also don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at you talking, and I see the joy and the pain, just both those feelings inside of you are just, so have you regretted of maybe not coming out earlier? Or have you thought about delaying the wedding to give your family a little bit more time, so maybe they will come around? And have you had those thoughts?
Great question. I definitely don't regret the timing of coming out. I think, and like I give this advice, and it's funny because I didn't necessarily take it, but like when someone comes out, like you should do it for yourself for sure. And I definitely did it for myself, but I felt like I needed to have some support. And I found that in Alissa, as well as her family, which I need to be very, very intentional of thanking her family, just because they filled the voids that I was missing, right? Like her mother will never be my true mother, the one who like gave birth to me, right? Yeah. But she definitely fulfilled a lot of those needs of like comforting me or calling me and encouraging me. And same with her dad. And Alissa has a sister, a younger sister. And so even with her, like her whole family, her cousins, her uncles and aunts, they were just so loving and accepting of me, and was very like intentional to show their love and be like, hey, we hear and we see like the hardship that is happening to not only like moving in with each other and like navigating that, because we've never lived with each other. So learning each other's quirks, living together, planning a wedding. We both actually had job changes in that time frame as well. But like knowing that your family is not there for you. And so it was difficult, but at the same time, like my family had asked me that too, like, hey, could you postpone the wedding and give us more time? But truthfully, I just didn't see them coming around, and it wouldn't matter because no matter what, I'm going to marry Alissa. And like we have plans to like move our life forward, and it shouldn't be on their timetable. And so for me, it's definitely been hard living with this for a very long time. And then finally being able to like come out, it's a huge weight off my shoulders. Like I feel this sense of freedom, and it's amazing. And it's even more amazing and fruitful when it's with somebody who also supports me and like respects that, like I was going to do it. And it just was taking some time for me to do it.
Thank you for sharing this. And that makes total sense now why you waited, that when you have a support system behind you, when you actually have that weight lifted off your shoulder, like you said, that somebody's going to be there for you and help you get through this emotionally. Yeah. Do you think it's like religious or cultural related? The reason they having a hard time with this, or more personal? Sure. I don't know. Have they been living in America for a long time like you?
Yeah, actually, so my parents, they still reside in Minnesota. They actually came to America at a pretty young age. My mom came to Minnesota actually when she was 18. So she's been in America for some time. And I think my dad was in his mid to late 20s when he came over as well. So my like cousins, I have a compilation of 6 like first cousins, and we're all born in Minnesota. And so I think it's a mixture of both religious as well as cultural. To their knowledge, they don't know anybody else who is in our community who is also gay. So I was one of the first to come out and be I guess you could say, proud as well, and have this marriage. And then on top of that, the religion piece, I think, is also it's a little bit more driving force than the cultural piece, just because like growing up, it was taught that like homosexuality is wrong, it's a sin, and just being around that environment, you kind of just are taught at a very young age that this is right and this is wrong, and it's that black and white. And unfortunately, like for me, I knew at a very young age that I was very different compared to my cousins, compared to those in my community, as well as in my peer group in school. And I think I knew from the very, very, very young age. And for that, I had to protect myself. And so I pushed it and suppressed it as deep as possible so that no one would know. And I would try to kind of fit in this mold that they would want me to. But I would like to say, like, I feel like I did a good job of trying to fight off the cultural pieces of it. So I'm 31 and I got married at 31. Yeah, I got married at 31. And so for me, being 31 and unmarried is very unheard of in the Indian community. So there's a lot of growing up, or I guess after I turned 21, there was a lot of, hey, we need to get you married, and let's do an arranged marriage. And although that was prevalent in my parents' generation, it's not in my generation with my cousins. And so I tried to push that off and push it off as much as possible, just because I knew that I would never marry a man, and I did my best to kind of wait for Alissa. But
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking too that like particularly Aveena, have also had experiences of like rejection, I guess, or judgment from white Americans as well, like in religious communities too. So it seems like in your experience that there's been a mix of kind of cultural roots of homophobia and then also religious roots.
I agree. And so so it was so even me coming out was a very big deal, as you can imagine, in general, but also just my family trying to protect the family, I guess, by being like, hey, don't post anything on social media, don't like make it known to other people. And then even with my church community, that was also very difficult. So when I moved to Seattle, I got involved in a church here, and really, really was like my first community here in Seattle, because I moved out here not knowing anybody. And so when they found out, it was hard because 3 years I was invested in this church, and then they found out 3 years later, and it was total rejection, and I was asked to leave. And so it was hard. So that I was dealing with heartbreak, not only from my family, who I expected, but also like it was hard to face that reality. But then people who I like grew to really love and care for in this community, and we all did. And then all of a sudden, one thing, just like that, it was like over. And so I went from having this like massive community where I felt so loved to completely just truly having myself, Alissa, and like her, and then like a few other friends that on my end that stuck around. And so like it was hard during our like wedding planning season, which it should be so joyful and filled with joy. And it was, don't get me wrong, it was difficult for both of us though, just because it felt like every day I'd come home just like in tears of like how hard it was to feel like face this rejection and feel this very lonely world that was different. And for Alissa, like you had come out 10 years ago, and it was as though you were reliving it again, which is hard, right? It's hard to not only witness your loved one going through this, but not only like feeling triggered in some way, because they're also talking about you, right? They're talking about who you are as a person.
Yeah.
Yes. I have to say I admire your strength that you have, because that must have been so hard to not just one, it's not just coming from one person. All of a sudden your whole world that you had around you just collapses, Yeah, but it feels like you guys were able to like start a new life together, a fresh new beginning. with friends who you really want to have for the rest of your life, not just who were with you for not who you really are. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And even like to speak to our wedding day, like for me specifically, I think this is a God thing, but like that day, although yes, it is the happiest day of anyone's life to get married, for me specifically, I was able to not even think about like all of the hurt and pain the past, I don't know, 10 months at that point of like what had happened with me coming out and us being married. Like it was, I've never felt more present in the moment in anything. But it was by far like the most joyful, best day ever. Like it was truly the best day ever. I couldn't have asked for a better, not only like the small details of the wedding, but like although the void of not having my family there, it was definitely like it was filled up very quickly with the people who were there. And like I wouldn't want it any other way, truthfully. Now that it's happened and I can reflect back at it, like I can't even imagine what it would have been like even with my family there, if that makes sense. It was just so beautiful and rich and like such a fruitful moment for me that I was just like, man, this is incredible. I'm like the luckiest person in the world.
That's amazing. How did that feel for you, Alissa, as far as, you know, dealing with all of these emotions and obviously having your family supporting you, sounds like,
Yeah.
and to just supporting your partner in all of this?
It was a lot. I mean, Aveena did a really wonderful job of reassuring me when I needed to hear like she was still in this, she still wanted to get married, this wasn't too much. In addition to like being authentic and sharing her feelings too. And like she said, there were definitely times when I felt like brought back to my like 20-year-old self of, you know, coming out and dealing with some of the backlash around that. And it's hard to see someone that you love go through pain and be hurt with hurtful words. And so yeah, it was painful. It was also though like a time of like a lot of closeness between us, for sure. So it was in some ways I think it like really strengthened us.
Yeah.
At times when it could have like chipped away at our relationship, instead we let that build us up and bring us closer.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would say that there are some multicultural couples that can relate to this regardless of their gender. Just when they announce to their family that they're marrying somebody from a different culture, from a different religion or race, you know, just anything, or they're going to move away from home to another country. So all of these things can just cause so much drama and pain. And yeah, I can completely relate to that. Yeah.
I was going to say one thing that I ended up having to do that might be helpful for other people to hear. So as the one with the more accepting family, I had to be really intentional about setting boundaries with my family around how involved they would be and what kind of decisions they would make, because it was so easy for my family's voices to be the loudest. And so I didn't always do this, and I sometimes learned the hard way, but you know, being really thoughtful about not just making a decision with my mom, for example, before talking with Aveena, and making sure that she and I were on the same page, like really empowering her and your sister too, to speak up for what felt most comfortable for you, because otherwise it would have been so easy for the wedding to be a reflection of me and my family, and less so you and what you felt comfortable with.
Sure.
And different aspects, like culturally, religiously, and just like vision in general of the wedding.
I will say it was cool to that is that, you know, one of the things I mentioned earlier, one of the non-negotiables, quote unquote, that I had was having a henna party or a mehndi party, which is pretty traditional for an Indian bride to have. And it was super cool for me and my sister and Milena to be able to kind of like throw this party on, like, and it was like my party to my new family and like my friends and my new family, like your uncles and aunts your aunts, because it was for women only, but And it was just really cool to have that be imparted as part of the wedding, just because it felt like kind of my footprint, I guess, as weird as that sounds. But like, it was nice to be able to like be the one to like throw this party and do it on behalf of me and my sister, our family, for my new family. And it was very cool. Alissa wore traditional Indian, an Indian lenga. And so that was obviously really great for me. Just because you look stunning in the Indian clothes. But so like stuff like that was really cool. And to see those who attended, like her aunts and cousins, to do Mehndi as well and have them sit down and be able to have that on their hands was just like a really cool, like kind of a beautiful moment for me to also witness. And then partaking in Indian food. And there was obviously a lot of Indian music. And it was just a very cool thing for me to experience, I guess.
Yeah. I definitely can relate to that because, you know, when somebody from, you know, a relationship, they move to a new country, to a new culture, and they're trying to feel that their culture is just as valuable in a wedding like the other ones who they live in their country or something, or they have families around. So when you have that feeling of they are respecting and enjoying, you know, and they want to adopt that culture to themselves too, that just, it's such a good feeling. Yeah.
And that's what was really cool is you did a great job articulating, like that's how I felt, was like they were adopting that and kind of like let's do it. Let's like, this is something important to you and this is you. And so like let us be a part of that. And like they immerse themselves, and it was just really cool to see that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate them for that.
How was it for you, Alissa, having, you know, the henna parties, just doing something you probably never done in your life before?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I loved it. It was a great example, an event where I'm like, do whatever you guys want. I trust you. It was beautiful. And people loved it. I mean, like, I think it was, I don't know, people loved our wedding too, but I just like had so many family members and friends come up to me saying they were having like the best time. They loved the food, they loved the henna, they loved the music. And so I just kind of went with the flow. I think the only thing that I didn't expect was towards the end when I had to feed you something. What was that?
So it is traditional that also that like at the Mehndi party, or even depending on how you do it, like you have people feed you Indian sweets as kind of like a blessing and like a good luck. And so basically me and Alissa would sit on the couch and basically faced other folks, and we had people feed us. So like my sister fed both of us Indian sweets, and then your mom did the same. And it's just kind of like a good luck and a blessings type of thing that you do with each other. In the Indian culture, you do that for birthdays as well, but big events kind of thing. And so we were eating a lot of Indian sweets, and I don't know if you've had Indian sweets, but they're very, 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 very sweet. Very, very sweet. And so by the end of it, you kind of just are like eating it, trying to stomach it just because of how sweet it is. And you just have people feeding you the different types of Indian sweets. But it was cool. I'm so glad that was also incorporated as well. It just felt very cool and just like a precious moment to have, and to see my sister feed my like soon to be bride was just a cool moment for me. So
wow, that sounds really fun. I don't like too sweet either, so I can totally feel the pain of like, oh.
But how can you argue with someone feeding you? I mean, like last time someone fed me was when I was a baby, so I'm okay with that.
That's true. That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about the wedding.
Sure.
I think that some of my listeners would probably are wondering, how does it go when you have to make decisions that are very gender specific, you know, especially even with couples who are, you know, have a groom and a bride, and then sometimes the bride would say, I don't want to do this tradition because it has a bad meaning or has some meaning that I don't want to, against my beliefs. So how did it go for you guys? Do you have any specific example that maybe you can share or advice?
Sure. So, yeah, that's a great question. So part of what helped me through this year was having a really wonderful therapist, and she was also getting married. And so we would like talk about our different experiences, and she could like really empathize. But one thing that she told me early on was to make the day about us and our love, and to have it reflect who we are. And, you know, she like gave me permission to turn down traditions that just don't fit us. And so there were certain things that Aveena and I talked about, and it just didn't feel like we didn't want to feed each other cake, for example.
Right.
And neither of us wanted to do
like a giving away.
Yeah, the giving away of the bride at the end of the aisle, or
we definitely I will say though, we did have people walk us down the aisle, but like the ceremony of like who gives who to, you know, that was not done, just because I mean, I don't know, for us it was more like we're our own individual. You know, we are intentionally making this decision. So like but another one was the father-daughter dance.
Yeah, so part of what I had to think about too, with my family being more involved, is what are some of the traditions that are really important to me, that I wanted to do regardless of whether Aveena could do it. So I decided it was really important to me that my dad walk me down the aisle, but I didn't care as much about having a father-daughter dance. Like, my dad and I are both like pretty shy. We don't love the spotlight. He was so focused on his toast, and he gave like the most beautiful toast. Everyone was in tears. And so, yeah, it was like a balance of thinking about what fit us as individuals, and then what felt like a nice way to be respectful for one another, given we had different circumstances. And so I didn't want to do a father-daughter dance, knowing that Aveena wouldn't do one.
Another one was, well, there's two things. One was I had asked Alissa if she was okay with incorporating communion. So again, being raised in a Christian background, I've always loved and desired to have communion for the first time with my wife on our wedding day. And so our officiant is actually a really good friend of both of ours, and he did such a great job of tailoring that whole like environment of communion, because a lot of people who attended our wedding might be religious but might not be, or be spiritual, or understand what communion meant. And so he set the stage very well of like, hey, this is a moment where, you know, Alissa and Aveena are going to take communion. Take this moment to either reflect, pass good vibes to them, sit in silence as the music plays. So he did a really good job to not make it very like religious and very like I don't know what the word I'm trying to look for, but he did such a great job of just creating a very peaceful environment and free flowing. Another great thing that I give credit to Alissa is finding vendors who are very intentional with working with LGBTQ community, with the LGBTQ community. And so I think that is definitely a piece of advice I would give, not only to those who are in the LGBTQ community, but those who are in interracial relationships. Unfortunately, that is still a problem where people don't want to work with those who are interracial. And so just being very intentional with finding those vendors, and even if you can't find them from the jump, or, you know, just take that time to be very, very intentional with that, just because it does pay off. It makes things very easy. It makes less stress on you because the vendors have worked in this environment before, or know how to ask the right questions, or how to create the great environment that suits you as a couple, or, you know, in this case, us. I
mean, like, the last thing that we wanted to think about on our wedding day was whether or not like our photographer was comfortable with seeing us kiss, right? Or, I mean, so it was, that was such a huge relief to find people who were like so excited to work with us, and were also like in love with the fact that it was a multicultural wedding.
That's a great point. Do you have any specific advice on how to find those vendors?
Sure. So there are a handful of different sites out there. You could just search LGBTQ vendors. There are different LGBTQ blogs. I think I found our photographer on Instagram, and I might have, I'm trying to remember how I found her, but she had photographed another same-sex couple's wedding, and so I knew that she must have been okay with that. Once we connected with her, we asked for recommendations, and she gave us a list of wonderful vendors.
So
we
many
went
great
with
vendors.
basically everyone
Every
that we
single one.
used was from her list.
Yeah.
And she was able to verify, like, this person is very comfortable with same-sex relationships. Like, this person would, you know, be happy to work with the multicultural piece. And she kind of vet them a little bit. Because it's hard to do the work all on your own, too.
And save you some time to, of that uncomfortable conversations and wasting your time. Yeah.
There's a couple of great ones that I really like. Dancing with Her is a really good blog or site where they have their vendors like curated of like, these are the ones that are really great to work with who are in the LGBTQ community, as well as H&H weddings. Again, these are all things, they're online. They have an online presence as well as on Instagram and whatnot, but they do a really good job of curating these vendors based on where you live and what you're looking for that are LGBTQ friendly. So definitely some really great resources out there.
Yeah.
And then do you guys want to talk a little bit about what the communion ceremony is for some of the listeners who don't know?
Sorry, I didn't expand on that. So communion is done in the Christian faith. Basically, it's partaking of bread representing Jesus' body and then wine representing Jesus' blood. And it's taken for those who are believers of Christ. And for me specifically, I think it's such a coveted kind of, I wouldn't even call it a ceremony. It's more of just like a really nice thing to do, I guess. And I just always had that desire to partake in that with my wife, just because it's a little bit sacred. It takes some time to just really reflect, at least for me specifically, like what brought me here. And for me, like I thank God so many times of like bringing Alissa to me, like allowing me to live this wonderful life and being truly blessed. And in that moment where our officiant Chris, what he did was he kind of took us aside from the altar, and there was a side table, and it was really cool how he did that. So he set up the congregation or the crowd to kind of be like, hey, take this moment to reflect, send good vibes to Alissa and Aveena. And when he took us to the side, he actually like told us to take a deep breath. He's like, we're almost there. You guys are doing such a great job. He did like a little pep talk, which super grateful for. And then he just described to us like what the bread represented, what the wine represented. And then he prayed over us, just being like, praying for a wonderful life together and just this blessing, this union. And so we partake in communion, and it was altogether probably like a 2-minute affair, not even. And then he brought us back to our quote unquote altar or like the front of the aisle and continued the ceremony. So it was super quick. It was just like a moment for us to take a step back and just like kind of live in the moment a little bit, because as one could imagine, like your wedding day goes by so fast. And I would definitely say like that was a moment where I was able to take a breath, relax a little bit, and then just like continue the ceremony. And for me, I was like highly emotional that day. Like the entire day I was very emotional, but even going through the vows, I was very emotional. I barely made it through. And for me specifically, it started off, my sister actually walked me down the aisle, and me and my sister have such a great relationship that we both were just in tears the entire time walking down the aisle. And I gave her like this massive hug, and to this day, like super grateful for her, just because like to me that was a huge representation of just like who we are. It's always just been the two of us, and now it's like now Alyssa's now in my life, and yeah.
I will say too, when we talked about doing communion, it was important to me that we describe it to the audience in a way that would feel accessible to other people. And so I had, again, lots of people come up to me afterwards saying it was like a really nice moment for them. So people who identify as just being spiritual, or however they identify, it was, they enjoyed it. Essentially, we played like really nice music in the background, and people could watch us if they wanted, and kind of like experience it with us, where they could close their eyes, whatever. And it ended up, I think, feeling like a really like inclusive moment.
It's always good to have some kind of like, what's the word, that like reassurance that after something happens, to be like, yeah, this was really nice, so you're not wondering like, did they think this was weird or
right. And like truthfully, again, like credit goes to Chris because he worked so hard in like creating that moment and like making sure that he tailored his words to that to make sure that it was inclusive, but also like, hey, this is a moment that we're going to step aside to do this, take this time to also take a breath, right? Like there was the ceremony itself, I think was very emotional for everybody just because they had all come through this journey with us, knowing the difficulties that we had faced, as well as like even just having the ability to marry same sex is very new in America. And Chris did a good job of pointing that out. And I think that really set home and like kind of set the stage for the whole day of like, this is very important. And like, this is something to not take lightly. And I'm sure everyone believes that when they go to a wedding or when they are a part of a wedding, it's not something to take lightly, but even more so, like this is something that is very new to America, and that we should count ourselves lucky and honored to be a part of it. So
yeah. That's true. I love that they brought that into, and because it really is. And if you think about it, with the world being so open, and even just multicultural couples and interracial couples, just everything is becoming more acceptable to others, with the internet and with just everything. Just people are more aware of things, and they can say their opinion to everything. So you just kind of once you find your people, find the community that supports you, it's just something that gives you so much emotion, that otherwise you wouldn't have.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And I think that's like the biggest thing you nailed on the head of just like, obviously everyone is entitled to their own opinion. And like, at the end of the day, I think even with my family, like I still love them, and I respect their opinion and how they view things. And that will never change from either of our perspectives. Like we do our best to include them in things. And I think that's the biggest thing that we can do, right? Is just like kind of show love. I think love is truly freedom. And so for me, I think that's what I have to do is like, as difficult as it can be, especially in this world, whether it's being interracial or whether it's just being a gay couple, I think like you have to posture yourself and be loving, and you have to try to fight the hate with love, just because it is, that's the only thing you can do, really.
Well, you guys definitely are doing the best, and really just everything you've been through, it just shows how much strength you guys have individually and also together, especially together as a couple. So before we get into the end of this episode, is there anything that we maybe didn't talk about that you would like to mention? I don't know, some like cultural specific things that you implemented, some details about the wedding that you had to blend together, or any advice that you have maybe for couples?
I think we alluded to this, but it ended up working really nicely for Aveena's side to be wearing traditional Indian, including her bridesmaids, and for me to be wearing traditional kind of American Western, including my bridesmaids. And I think sometimes there's this push to like make everyone look uniform, and it actually ended up like we complemented each other really nicely, our whole party, even though people were dressed in different things and wearing like different colors. And that's kind of the biggest thing that comes to mind about the wedding day itself.
Yeah. Like Alissa said, make it about yourselves, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of what your theme is or whatnot, just make sure you think about yourselves when you're doing that.
That's a great advice, and I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on a podcast. I really enjoyed, and I learned a lot from you, and a lot of eye-opening advices, and thank you so much for being so open. And I think that your story is going to inspire and help so many couples out there who hear this story. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank
we
you.
feel so honored.
Great to talk to you.
Yes, me too. I enjoyed it. And do you guys want to maybe share some resource where they can find you? Some listeners, if they want to ask more questions or they want to see some pictures or connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. I'll go first. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Aveena Matthew. That's A-V as in Victor, E-E-N-A, and Matthew with one T, all one word. And then, Go ahead.
And then people can find wedding photos through your
Yes.
Instagram.
Yes.
Who's published photos of us online?
Oh yeah. Also Carly, our photographer, Carly Jane. So at Carly Jane Photography, you can find pictures of us too. Shout out to her. Great photographer.
Definitely. I will put her on the show notes so they can check her out.
Definitely.
Other blogs?
Oh yes. And then we were on Dancing with Her. We were on their blog as well as Equally Wed. We're on there as well, and H&H and the LGBTQ. Their Instagram handle. You can find us there too.
Yeah, we looked out. It was crazy. Lots of people are reaching out to us. My information is it. So going to your page is probably best.
Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing. I'm excited to check all of those out for sure.
For sure, definitely.
Thank you so much again, guys. Have a great day.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you too.
Bye.
Bye.